What does it mean to be born into one of America's most powerful families, yet remain an outsider? Tiffany Trump has long been seen as the forgotten daughter, living on the fringes of the Trump dynasty. Was she intentionally kept at a distance, or did she choose a different path away from the political and business empire of her father? Raised in California, far from the Manhattan spotlight, Tiffany's journey, from law school to a high-profile marriage, contrasts sharply with her half-siblings' roles in the Trump legacy. While Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric embraced the family brand, Tiffany remained in the background. But was she truly excluded, or has she quietly forged her own identity? Will Tiffany step into the Trump empire, or will she continue to chart her own course? The answers may not be simple, but one thing is clear. Her story is far from over. Tiffany Trump was never supposed to be the black sheep of her family. But from the moment she was born, her place in the Trump dynasty was uncertain. Unlike her half-siblings, who were raised in the heart of their father's empire, Tiffany was born into scandal, raised in a different world, and kept at a distance from the family that would define her name. Her story begins with an affair that shook the Trump family. For 14 years, Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump were one of New York's most powerful couples, building an empire that was as much about business as it was about their perfectly curated family image. But in the early 90s, that image was shattered when Trump's affair with a young actress, Marla Maples, became tabloid fodder. It wasn't just a whispered rumor, it was an all-out media frenzy. The scandal reached its peak in 1990 when Maples was caught on record gushing about Trump, calling him the best sex I ever had. The press devoured every detail, and Ivanka, humiliated and enraged, filed for divorce in 1992. For Trump, the fallout was a public relations nightmare, but the bigger shock was yet to come. In 1993, just months after his divorce from Ivanka was finalized, Maples revealed that she was pregnant. Donald Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, made it clear that the news was not exactly part of his plan. Years later, in an interview with Howard Stern, he admitted that he hadn't been thrilled when he first learned Maples was expecting. But like everything in Trump's world, he adapted. And by October of that year, Tiffany Ariana Trump was born. The birth of his fourth child did little to mend the chaos in Trump's personal life. In a move that was widely viewed as damage control, he married Maples in December of that same year. But even then, it was clear that this marriage was different. Unlike his previous union with Ivanka, which had lasted 14 years and produced 3 high-profile children, Trump's relationship with Maples never had the same strength. Their marriage barely lasted 6 years, ending in a divorce that left Tiffany and her mother on the outside of the Trump world. In 1999, when Tiffany was just 6 years old, Donald and Marla officially split. The divorce settlement was straightforward. Maples was granted full custody of their daughter and was awarded $1 million in financial support. Compared to the vast wealth of the Trump family, it was a drop in the ocean. With that, Tiffany's fate was sealed. She would grow up in California, far from the golden towers of Manhattan, and even farther from the empire that bore her name. While her half-siblings, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, were raised under the watchful eye of their father, Tiffany's childhood was entirely different. She was not part of the Trump brand, nor was she groomed for the business world like her older siblings. Instead, she was raised by Maples, a single mother who did her best to shield her daughter from the pressures of being a Trump. The contrast was stark. While Ivanka was attending exclusive prep schools in New York, Tiffany was growing up in California's more laid-back atmosphere. Her world was one of private schools, but not the kind that automatically stamped her as a future business mogul. She attended Viewpoint School, a well-regarded private institution in Calabasas, with a tuition of over $30,000 per year, an expense reportedly covered by her father. Though she had Trump's last name, Tiffany's life was a world apart from the one her siblings knew. She rarely saw her father, only visiting him on holidays or the occasional spring break. Unlike Don Jr. and Eric, who spent their childhoods learning the ins and outs of the Trump organization, Tiffany had no direct exposure to the business empire. Instead, her childhood was shaped by the influence of her mother and the Hollywood environment that surrounded them. And as she grew older, it became clear that Tiffany was on a vastly different path. By her teenage years, she had already begun carving out a different identity. While her half-siblings were preparing for their future roles in the Trump organization, Tiffany was making a name for herself in an entirely different circle. She became part of Los Angeles' elite social scene, befriending the likes of Barron Hilton, Keira Kennedy, and E.J. Johnson. Dubbed the Snap Pack, this group of wealthy socialites was known for their extravagant lifestyles and their dominance on social media. For a while, Tiffany embraced it. She was a regular on Instagram, documenting her life in a way that was more in line with Hollywood than Wall Street. She even made a brief attempt at a music career. In 2011, at the age of 18, she released a pop single titled "Like a Bird." The song, a mix of electronic beats and auto-tuned vocals, didn't exactly take off, but it was a clear sign that Tiffany was not looking to follow in her father's footsteps. Instead of real estate, politics, or business, she seemed to be drawn to the glamour of entertainment and fashion. She interned at Vogue, an opportunity reportedly secured with the help of her half-sister Ivanka, and briefly dabbled in modeling. But despite her efforts to establish her own identity, Tiffany couldn't completely escape the shadow of her father's name. And whether she liked it or not, the Trump legacy would always be tied to her future. In 2016, everything changed. Her father announced his candidacy for president, setting off a chain of events that would force Tiffany to reevaluate her place in the family. For years, she had been the Trump who lived on the outside, the one who wasn't involved in the family business or its politics. But as the campaign heated up, Tiffany suddenly found herself pulled into the spotlight. For the first time, she stepped onto the political stage, delivering a speech at the Republican National Convention. It was an unexpected move. Until that moment, Tiffany had largely stayed out of politics. Her social media presence had been more about vacations and fashion than policy and debates. But as the daughter of a presidential candidate, she was now part of the campaign, whether she wanted to be or not. Her speech was carefully crafted, emphasizing her father's kindness and dedication. She painted a picture of a man who had always been there for her, a loving and supportive father. But for those who had followed her life closely, the reality was more complicated. The truth was that Tiffany had spent most of her life on the periphery of the Trump empire, rarely mentioned in the same breath as her older siblings. And as the campaign progressed, one question loomed over her involvement. Was she truly part of the Trump family, or was she just another political asset? As Tiffany took her place alongside her siblings on the campaign trail, one thing became clear. She was no longer just the forgotten daughter. But whether she would ever be fully accepted into the inner circle of the Trump dynasty remained to be seen. Tiffany's sudden involvement in her father's campaign did not instantly mend her relationship with the rest of the Trump family. While she stood alongside Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric at public events, behind the scenes the dynamics were more complicated. The Trump brand had always been built on image, loyalty, and control. And for years, Tiffany had been an outsider, not part of the core group that had been molded to fit into the empire. Now she had to prove where she stood. Even as she publicly supported her father, it was clear that she was not as deeply embedded in the campaign as her older siblings. Ivanka had a formal role as a senior advisor. Don Jr. and Eric were heavily involved in the campaign strategy, and even Jared Kushner played a major part in shaping Trump's political narrative. Tiffany, on the other hand, was given a limited role, delivering a speech here and there but largely remaining in the background. Some saw this as a reflection of her father's reluctance to fully embrace her as a political asset, while others believed that her limited involvement was a result of her own indecision about where she stood. Despite her attempts to integrate herself into the family's public image, Tiffany continued to struggle with the reality that she had never been fully accepted by her half-siblings. Reports suggest that there was a concerted effort by some members of the Trump family to downplay her role and keep her at a distance. While Ivanka publicly maintained a friendly relationship with Tiffany, insiders claimed that she was never truly welcomed into the inner circle. Her presence at major events felt more like an obligation than a genuine family bond. The rumored inheritance battle further underscored the tensions between Tiffany and her half-siblings. In recordings that surfaced from private conversations, it was suggested that Don Jr. and Ivanka had lobbied their father to reduce Tiffany's share of the family fortune. Donald Trump himself joked about it, saying, "Every time you have a child, it's 20% less." Whether he was serious or not, the sentiment revealed a stark reality. Tiffany was not seen as an equal to her half-siblings when it came to the Trump legacy. Perhaps the most telling sign of Tiffany's exclusion from the family's long-term plans was her absence from any major role within the Trump organization. While Don Jr. and Eric were positioned as future leaders of the company, and Ivanka took on high-profile roles in both business and politics, Tiffany had no defined place in the empire. She had pursued a different path, attending the University of Pennsylvania and later Georgetown Law. But even with her prestigious education, there was no indication that she would be given a meaningful role in her father's business or political ventures. This uncertainty about her future was something Tiffany herself seemed aware of. While she had shown public support for her father's campaigns, she had also made subtle moves that suggested she was keeping her options open. In 2018, she was caught liking an anti-GOP post on Instagram, sparking speculation about her true political beliefs. While she later deleted the like, the incident raised questions about whether she was entirely aligned with her father's conservative stance. Her social life also suggested a different trajectory. Unlike her older siblings, who were carefully crafting their public personas around the Trump brand, Tiffany continued to engage in the elite social circles of New York and Los Angeles. She maintained friendships with wealthy socialites, celebrities, and influencers, distancing herself from the intense political atmosphere that her family was deeply involved in. It wasn't until she enrolled at Georgetown Law in 2017 that some began to speculate that she might be positioning herself for a more serious role in the Trump world. Law school was a sharp departure from her previous interests in fashion, music, and social media. Some believed that she was preparing to take on a legal role within the Trump organization, perhaps as the trusted attorney her father could rely on. Others saw it as an attempt to carve out a career independent of her father's influence. Despite these efforts, Tiffany remained an anomaly within the Trump family. She was neither fully embraced nor entirely cast aside. She was present at key moments but rarely at the forefront. Her speeches at the Republican National Conventions in 2016 and 2020 showed a woman who was willing to stand by her father, yet the lack of a formal role or clear political ambitions suggested that she was still figuring out where she belonged. By the time Donald Trump's presidency came to an end, Tiffany was still somewhat of an outsider. While Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric had positioned themselves as political and business figures within the Trump empire, Tiffany had not made any definitive moves in either direction. In the weeks following Trump's departure from the White House, Tiffany announced her engagement to Michael Boulos, a wealthy businessman from a prominent Lebanese family. This move once again signaled her potential to step away from the Trump legacy and forge her own path. As she moved into the next chapter of her life, the question remained: would Tiffany Trump ever find a solid place in the Trump dynasty, or was she destined to remain on the outskirts of one of America's most controversial families? While she had spent years trying to balance her loyalty to her father with her desire for independence, the reality was that her position within the Trump empire had never been secure. Whether by design or circumstance, Tiffany Trump had always been the black sheep of the family, and as time went on, it seemed increasingly likely that she would stay that way. As Tiffany Trump navigated the complexities of her place in the Trump dynasty, one thing became increasingly clear: she was neither fully in nor completely out. While her siblings occupied prominent roles within the Trump organization and political campaigns, Tiffany remained on the periphery. Her journey, however, was far from static. Instead, it was a continuous balancing act between maintaining her individuality and proving her allegiance to the family name. After years of being largely detached from the Trump business world, Tiffany's time at Georgetown Law seemed like a potential turning point. A degree in law carried weight, and for someone who had long been considered an outsider, it hinted at the possibility of a more serious role within the family. Speculation grew that she might take on legal responsibilities for the Trump organization or serve as an advisor within her father's political network. Yet even as she excelled in her studies, her future remained ambiguous. Unlike her older siblings, Tiffany did not have a guaranteed path within the empire. Ivanka had successfully transitioned from the business world to the political stage, positioning herself as a key figure in the Trump administration. Don Jr. and Eric had long been involved in the family business, running various aspects of the Trump organization. Tiffany, however, lacked the same foundation. Without a defined role, she continued to be viewed as an outsider, even as she attended key family events and publicly supported her father. Her presence at the Republican National Convention in 2020 was another sign that she was still trying to find her footing. In her speech, she fiercely defended her father and criticized the media for suppressing conservative voices. She spoke passionately, and for a brief moment, it appeared as though she might finally be carving out a place for herself within the Trump political machine. But once again, her involvement remained surface level. Unlike Ivanka, who took on official advisory roles and actively shaped policy discussions, Tiffany's contributions were more symbolic than substantive. Beyond the political stage, Tiffany's relationship with her siblings remained complicated. While she was on friendlier terms with Ivanka, the distance between her and Don Jr. and Eric was still noticeable. Unlike them, she had not spent her childhood in Trump Tower, attending meetings with their father and being immersed in the business world from a young age. Her upbringing had been fundamentally different, and that gap was difficult to bridge. The rumored inheritance battle only fueled further speculation about her standing within the family. Though Trump himself had often joked about the division of wealth among his children, reports suggested that Don Jr. and Ivanka had actively sought to limit Tiffany's financial share. Whether these claims were exaggerated or grounded in reality, they underscored the ongoing perception that Tiffany was not truly part of the inner circle. Her engagement to Michael Boulos, a billionaire heir with international business ties, added another layer of intrigue to her future. The relationship, which had developed over several years, positioned Tiffany within a new elite social circle, one that extended beyond the Trump name. While her siblings were deeply embedded in their father's world, Tiffany was forming connections that could offer her an alternative path. Some speculated that her marriage to Boulos could signal a break from the Trump dynasty, allowing her to establish an identity outside of her father's legacy. As the dust settled on her father's presidency, Tiffany found herself at yet another crossroads. With her law degree in hand and her engagement making headlines, she had the opportunity to redefine her trajectory. She could choose to align more closely with her family and attempt to secure a lasting role within the Trump empire. Or she could fully embrace a life outside of it, distancing herself from the controversies and expectations that came with the name. Publicly, she continued to express loyalty to her father, but her actions painted a more nuanced picture. Unlike her siblings, who remained vocal in their political support for Trump even after his departure from office, Tiffany maintained a lower profile. She attended events and family gatherings, but she was not actively involved in Trump-related business or political efforts. This deliberate distance suggested that while she was not severing ties completely, she was also not fully committing to the Trump brand. For years, Tiffany Trump had walked a fine line between insider and outsider. Her journey had been marked by moments of inclusion followed by periods of detachment. Whether due to circumstance, choice, or a combination of both, she had never managed to solidify a permanent role within the family. And as she moved into the next phase of her life, the question remained: would she finally step into the Trump empire, or would she continue to chart her own course? If history was any indication, the answer would not be straightforward. Tiffany had spent much of her life in a state of limbo, never fully embraced, but never entirely pushed away. As she stood on the precipice of a new chapter, she faced the same uncertainty that had defined her relationship with her family from the very beginning. Whether she would ultimately be remembered as a key figure in the Trump legacy, or as the perpetual outsider, remained to be seen. Despite her efforts to maintain a balanced presence in the Trump family, Tiffany continued to exist in a gray area, never fully in the inner circle, yet never entirely removed. As the post-presidency era set in, the roles of her siblings became more defined. Ivanka had pivoted away from politics to focus on her family and business ventures. Don Jr. and Eric remained fiercely loyal to their father, keeping his political ambitions alive. But Tiffany? She remained a wild card, appearing at key family moments but without a clear trajectory. Her engagement to Michael Boulos, a Lebanese billionaire heir, only furthered speculation about her future. Unlike her siblings, who married within politically connected or business-oriented circles aligned with their father's empire, Tiffany's relationship hinted at a possible shift away from the Trump legacy. The Boulos family had significant business interests in Africa and the Middle East, and Tiffany's engagement marked her as a potential bridge to an entirely different sphere of influence. Some wondered whether she would use these connections to create her own path, independent of the Trump name. Her wedding in early 2023 was a grand affair, hosted at Mar-a-Lago, the family's signature property in Palm Beach, Florida. Despite the opulence, it was notable that Tiffany's wedding was not as politically charged as Ivanka's had been. While the family was in attendance, the event itself was more reflective of her personal tastes rather than a public display of Trump allegiance. It was a rare moment where Tiffany was front and center, not as a supporting player in the Trump dynasty, but as a woman charting her own future. Yet, even as she took steps in a new direction, she continued to walk the fine line between loyalty and independence. She had completed law school, and while there were occasional rumors that she might take on a legal role within the Trump organization, no concrete plans materialized. Unlike her siblings, who had well-defined responsibilities in the business or political spheres, Tiffany appeared content living a life without those constraints. This led to a lingering question. Was she deliberately keeping her distance, or was she simply not given the same opportunities as her half-siblings? Her father's continued legal troubles and political ambitions also complicated matters. With multiple investigations into Trump's business dealings and his controversial bid for a political comeback, loyalty within the family became more critical than ever. Don Jr. and Eric remained outspoken defenders of their father, actively engaging in media appearances and rallying support. Ivanka, in contrast, attempted to disengage from the political drama, a move that some saw as an attempt to rehabilitate her public image. Tiffany's approach, however, remained ambiguous. While she was not a vocal advocate for her father's political ambitions, she also never publicly distanced herself from him. She attended key family events, including Trump's major campaign announcements, but she was never a driving force in any of them. Unlike Ivanka, who had positioned herself as a polished political asset, or Don Jr., who had taken on the role of Trump's aggressive public defender, Tiffany's position was undefined. Her relative silence in the media only added to the mystery. Unlike her siblings, who frequently engaged with the press or posted politically charged statements on social media, Tiffany maintained a more personal and apolitical online presence. Her social media posts were largely about her travels, moments with Michael Boulos, and glimpses into her glamorous lifestyle, rather than the latest political controversies. To many, it seemed as though Tiffany was intentionally avoiding the high-stakes battles her family was embroiled in. Yet despite her attempts to remain outside of the political fray, Tiffany's last name ensured that she could never completely escape the weight of the Trump legacy. Every move she made, from her choice of career to her marriage, was scrutinized through the lens of her father's larger-than-life presence. Whether she wanted to or not, she was still part of the Trump story. As the 2024 election cycle approached, speculation swirled about whether Tiffany would take on a greater role. Would she emerge as a key player in Trump's political comeback, or would she finally distance herself for good? Given her history, the answer was unlikely to be black and white. Tiffany had always operated in shades of gray, neither fully embracing nor outright rejecting the Trump identity. For years, she had been seen as the forgotten daughter, the black sheep who existed on the sidelines while her siblings took center stage. But perhaps that had been her greatest advantage all along. Unlike Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, Tiffany had managed to maintain a degree of autonomy, something rare in a family where loyalty and branding were paramount. Whether by design or circumstance, she had created a life that allowed her to step in and out of the Trump world on her own terms. As she moved forward, Tiffany's choices would continue to be analyzed. Would she finally claim a role within the Trump empire, or would she carve out a completely separate identity? If history had proven anything, it was that Tiffany Trump's place in her family was never simple, and it was unlikely to become so anytime soon. As Tiffany Trump continued to navigate her place in the Trump dynasty, one thing remained certain: she was still an anomaly within her own family. Unlike her siblings, who had carved out defined roles in business and politics, Tiffany had spent much of her life on the periphery, neither fully embracing nor completely rejecting the Trump brand. Now, with a law degree, a new marriage, and an uncertain future, she faced yet another defining moment in her life. Her wedding to Michael Boulos, held at Mar-a-Lago, was a grand affair, but notably different from the political spectacles her father often orchestrated. While it was a high-profile event, it lacked the calculated political maneuvering seen in her siblings' major life moments. Instead, it appeared to be a genuine celebration of Tiffany's personal life, rather than a strategic move within the Trump empire. Some speculated that this was another sign that she was intent on forging her own path, while others believed it was simply a matter of timing. With the family preoccupied by Donald Trump's legal battles and political ambitions, despite remaining relatively silent in the media, Tiffany's actions suggested she was still carefully balancing her identity. While she maintained a presence at key family gatherings, she was notably absent from the more aggressive political movements of her father's inner circle. Unlike Don Jr. and Eric, who had become the face of Trump's political brand post-presidency, Tiffany remained in the background. And unlike Ivanka, who had distanced herself from politics in an attempt to rebuild her own image, Tiffany had yet to make any definitive statement about her future plans. Her law degree, obtained from Georgetown University in 2020, had fueled speculation about whether she would take on a legal role in the Trump organization or assist with her father's numerous legal battles. Yet despite these rumors, there was little evidence to suggest she had any active involvement in the family business or political strategy. Instead, she continued to cultivate relationships outside of the Trump world, strengthening her ties with the Boulos family and exploring opportunities beyond the Trump empire. The contrast between Tiffany and her siblings was particularly evident in the way they approached the media. While her half-siblings actively engaged in political discourse, posting inflammatory statements and defending their father at every opportunity, Tiffany maintained a largely apolitical public presence. Her social media focused on personal milestones, weddings, vacations, and celebrations, rather than policy debates or political endorsements. This led many to question whether she was deliberately avoiding the spotlight or simply uninterested in the highly charged world of Trump politics. As the 2024 election cycle loomed, speculation about Tiffany's role in her father's campaign continued. Would she finally step into the political arena, or would she remain on the sidelines as she had done for most of her life? If history was any indication, the answer was likely somewhere in between. Tiffany had always managed to maintain a delicate balance, close enough to be recognized as part of the Trump family, but distant enough to avoid the controversies that often engulfed it. For years, Tiffany had been referred to as the black sheep of the Trump family, an outsider who never quite fit into the polished image her father wanted to project. Yet in many ways, that position had afforded her a unique level of freedom. She was not burdened by the same expectations as her siblings, nor was she required to participate in the aggressive political games that defined the Trump brand. Whether by choice or circumstance, she had managed to maintain a level of autonomy that set her apart from the rest of the family. Looking ahead, Tiffany's future remained as uncertain as ever. Would she leverage her law degree and step into a formal role within the Trump organization? Would she join her siblings in defending their father's political legacy, or would she finally take a definitive step away from the Trump name, choosing instead to build a life entirely separate from the empire that had shaped her existence? If there was one thing Tiffany had proven over the years, it was that she was not easily categorized. While she shared a last name with one of the most controversial figures in American politics, she had never fully embraced the expectations that came with it. Instead, she had spent her life carefully navigating the blurred lines between family loyalty and personal independence. As she moved forward, the world would continue to watch, waiting to see whether Tiffany Trump would finally claim her place in the Trump dynasty or continue to remain its most enigmatic figure. Regardless of the path she chose, one thing was certain: Tiffany's story was far from over. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.